Hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Now before you leave a comment telling me about the Infinity Stones video, I know of it, I've seen it. That being said, I wanted to make sure that I got the Krakoa era mutants done, so I want to check out this video, plus I think next week I will likely check out the Darkhawk video. Because of some personal curiosity, since Thorgy's video predicted that maybe we'll get Darkhawk in Tokon. That could be a really cool addition, so I want to know more about him. And yeah, the Stones video, that's gotta be definitely a multi-parter, so we're gonna be on that for a while once I get to it. Wanted to finish up everything first before doing that. Before we get into the reaction, however, if you guys are enjoying the content, please make sure to go support the original creator. Link very top of the description, like always.
Mutant Immortality, the greatest secret of Krakoa. In this nation, by mutants, for mutants, no one could die. Or rather, they could, but it certainly wouldn't stick for very long. After decades of oppression...
Well, unless if somebody in a leadership role decided that you shouldn't exist, or shouldn't come back, which was pretty fucked up.
And persecution for simply being mutants, mutant-kind discovering the secret to immortality was, needless to say, a game changer, especially in a world of superheroes where death is even more common, often by supernatural means. But immortality...
Well, yeah, but I also feel like it's not that uncommon to see a superhero just randomly come back. I feel like it's expected, no, at this point? Death very rarely sticks.
Immortality would not come simply to the mutants. It wasn't as easy as an arcane spell or magical potion. No, immortality was a process, and at the core of this process was a group of mutants simply known as the Five. The Five were legendary figures on Krakoa, so popular that they were almost worshipped due to the fact that their mutant powers, when used in tandem, could restore life to the dead.
How could you not? They're basically your guarantee when everything hits the fan, or shit hits the fan. It's like, yeah, these guys will be there to help you out. Best get on their good side, I say.
But how exactly did their powers combine in this way? How did the process work, and what effects did immortality have on a nation that was already filled with superpowered beings?
Yeah, that is an interesting concept to explore. And I think we covered a little bit of that within the Quiet Council. I still had a couple of questions to that. So hopefully they get answered in this video.
Those questions are what we're going to be talking about today.
After
all, nothing on Krakoa was particularly simple. A lot of what the mutants were doing was ethically dubious at best, and their actions are called into question a lot, not just by the readers, but by the books themselves. Ethical debates were like the core theme of the entire Krakoa era. So without...
Yeah, it's impossible not to see that being the case, considering how the mutants are represented, what they represent within the comics, and how they've gone about this with, you know, saying that the humans did this and this to us, and then they made a nation that did basically the same thing. In some ways, you could argue even worse. They may think that they're different, but ultimately, we're all the same.
Further ado, let's hop into things and talk about the secret to mutant immortality and the nature of the Five. Though before we get to the actual Five of the Five, there is a sixth factor in this process. Not a member per se, but an underlying system that lets everything else work. So we'll call this Step 0, Cerebro. A lot of you have probably heard of Cerebro in one form or another. It was in the live-action X-Men movies after all.
Yep.
But that one was an earlier version. In that form, Cerebro was basically a power amp for Professor X, a supercomputer that he could tap into telepathically and use to locate any mutant in the world. This was Cerebro's core functionality for a while, but around the formation of Krakoa, Charles Xavier had an idea for an upgrade to the device and approached the Technopathic Mutant Forge for help in designing it.
I think my memory on this is a little bit hazy, but wasn't Magneto's helmet also used in order to block Xavier from finding him?
With its new upgrades, Cerebro could not just scan for and detect mutants, it could actually copy all the data of their sentient minds, essentially creating a psychic backup of them that would exist within the system. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking.
Actually, 5 different Cerebro units were made, as Charles correctly predicted that mutant kind would want extra backups in case of emergency. I mean, yeah, Duh. That's something, if anybody knows of Cerebro existing, that would definitely be a thing that they would either want or want to destroy.
This is a video about immortality, and I'm already talking about psychic backups. If that's the case, isn't this not really immortality and more just cloning with extra steps? Well, don't worry, there are multiple comics out there written just to address that one question, so we will be talking about it, but those comics are at the end of the Krakoa era, so I'll address it after we've established how exactly this process works. But because I'm nice, I will tell you the answer to the question now. Yes, the Krakoan resurrection protocols do provide true immortality, and I'll explain how exactly later.
So is it like a transfer of consciousness rather than a carbon copy of the same person from a particular point in their life?
Anyway, once Cerebro was updated, Charles began making those backups, using the computer to scan for mutant minds and copying them into the system. Cerebro was constantly active too. It wasn't like it was taking old versions of people. New ones would be constantly downloaded, replacing the old so that the backups were up to date. Then there was another half of this foundational databank that was biological. After making Cerebro and having the psychic part of mutant resurrection,
saying after here is a little screwy because of some time retcon weirdness. It was established that Charles had set up Sinister as a sort of sleeper agent on this plan long before, and just now activated him. Whatever. Sinister? Charles manipulating Sinister? Or working together with him?
handled, Charles approached Mr. Sinister, one of the best geneticists in the world, and also definitely a supervillain, but don't worry about that, to create a database of every mutant genetic pattern that he could possibly get his hands on. And since genetics of mutants are Mr. Sinister's whole thing, that was a lot. These two archives are the data sets, essentially, that the Five use to do their work. And again, I know it sounds like complicated cloning, I promise it's not, you're just gonna have to bear with me for a bit until we get to that part of the explanation. Now with that established, we can talk about the members of the Five and the resurrection process itself. I'm going to do this by basically taking you through an example of a resurrection, guiding you through each step of the process, and whenever we reach a new member of the group, I'll tell you a little bit about their backstory and their powers. That means we begin with the first mutant involved in every revival, Fabio Medina, codename... Actually, in this case, I'm going to save the codename for comedic effect. Fabio first appeared in Uncanny X-Men in 2013 as one of the new wave of mutants that developed powers in the fallout of the Avengers vs. X-Men event. His mutant power was that he could generate gold balls. These balls would just kind of pop out of his body and then bounce around. He could fire them out with some measure of force, so they could be used as projectiles.
Wait, is his codename also just Gold Ball? But how is this at all important to the resurrection process, this whole immortality thing? Because all five of them have to play a role, right? Is he just like the one who creates like an egg for people to spawn from?
But also, they weren't particularly strong or durable. The balls were not made of metal or anything like that. I don't believe a solid density or texture of them has ever been nailed down, but from the way they're often drawn on panel, I imagine getting hit with one of these is like getting hit with a big basketball. Not the strongest attack in the world, but given that Fabio could make these balls with little to no effort, he was actually a not useless combatant. Being able to launch infinite basketballs at your opponent is dumb, but I mean, yeah, I don't want to fight a guy who can shoot infinite basketballs at me.
I mean, have you guys ever had a dodgeball thrown at full strength straight into your face? I remember those days. It's not fun.
Being a generally lighthearted and fun guy, Fabio accepted the nickname of
Balls are working
Gold
again.
Balls, and
there
that's
you
just
go.
what he was called for the rest of his Uncanny X-Men run and beyond. He was not the most common recurring character, but he did show up in books other than his own, and he was an ally of Miles Morales for a while. Then, the Krakoa era began. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit into some publication behind-the-scenes stuff, but trust me, it will be worth it. See, the mastermind, or the main one at least, behind the Krakoa X-Men comics was a guy named Jonathan Hickman, and rebooting things is Hickman's bread and butter. Hickman is notorious for wildly in-depth world building, as you'll see in the rest of this video, and with that, he has earned the title of Guy That Marvel Calls In when some portion of their world needs a total overhaul.
Yeah, when things are starting to not make much sense, we need him. Who you gotta call? John Hickman, apparently. I always have a deep respect for the people who can come in and get all these works from so many different writers and somehow connect them together into one shared universe. It just makes the comics so much more interesting that way, and probably my favorite parts of the comics so far.
Has done this with the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the magical side of Marvel on gods, which if you've been on this channel long enough, you've heard me rant about before, and several other things. Given that the X-Men and mutants in general weren't doing too hot in the late 2010s, Hickman was hired to fix this. So with that context, the inclusion of gold balls in the 5 suddenly gets a lot more interesting. His only power was basically shooting basketballs at people. So how on earth did Jonathan Hickman recontextualize him into someone that is core to the resurrection process of every mutant ever? Well, Jonathan Hickman, one of the best world builders in the game, guy responsible for a huge chunk of what Marvel is today, genius visionary mind when it comes to superhero comics, came up with the idea, what if balls was eggs? So in the Krakoa era of the X-Men, it is revealed that the weird balls, gold balls had the ability to generate all this time, are actually organic material. And not just organic material, they are non-fertilized eggs that he was just kind of shooting out of his body the whole time.
That sounds really weird. But then again, his entire power set from the very beginning was just strange, so... And I guess that's as good an explanation as any.
How exactly does this work? I don't know, man. He just makes eggs. He's the goose that lays the golden eggs, and that's his mutant power. He make egg, and this is the foundation for how the resurrection protocols work going forward. So this is step 1. Goldballs, who has at this point changed his code name and is now going by simply Egg, makes a egg, and then this egg is what the rest of the mutants will be using their powers on for the rest of this whole thing. I promise that this will get more serious from here on out. It just starts like this for some reason. Now that we have an egg to work with, we can move on from the most random stage of the process to the most nebulous of them, that being step 2, Proteus. Proteus's real name is Kevin McTaggart, son of Moira McTaggart, who is an incredibly important character to this era of mutantdom and probably someone who will get her own dedicated video in this little Krakoa series I've been doing. Proteus has a power...
Didn't we already learn about Moira? Wasn't she the one who could basically respawn and reset the universe whenever she died?
Befitting his very important lineage, he is a reality warper, most typically using his abilities on physical reality, so like matter and energy manipulation, but not technically limited to just that. As a reality warper, Proteus is incredibly powerful just at a baseline, but he does have a couple limitations that keep his power in check. One, he can only use his abilities within a limited radius around himself, though if he gets amplified by any number of things, that radius extends. The more important limitation is that he has a habit of burning out his physical body. When Kevin first started using his reality powers, he looked like a normal guy, but quickly learned that the more he used them, the more his physical form would degrade. This doesn't technically stop him from using the powers, however, it just turned him into an energy being. Cool as that sounds, though, it is definitely not a buff in any capacity.
No, I don't think I would like to look like Dr. Manhattan. I think is his name from The Watchmen. That doesn't seem great.
Proteus can only survive in his disembodied energy form for a limited time, and has to possess other people to use his abilities further, though he then just ends up burning out those bodies as well, so he kinda just jumps around from person to person, killing them and leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Now, skipping ahead for just a minute, this...
Also, yes, he originally debuted as a villain, but like many villains during this time, the promise of a safe nation for all mutants was enough to get him to help. You know, fair enough. Even for villains, sometimes they don't want to be playing the game. They just want to chill.
Limitation is of course not that big of a deal for his time within the Five, because they're resurrecting bodies all the time. So they keep a bunch of husks for Proteus to inhabit whenever he burns one out, and
Note the Proteus problem, where the powers of this mutant are directly associated with the destruction of its own body and are the direct cause of all physiological and psychological deviance over the years, has been solved by always having a backup mutant husk prepared for Proteus to inhabit where he burns out his old one. Depending on the frequency with which he is using his power, a Proteus body normally lasts 1 week, but can last as little as 1 day during periods of excessive power use. Proteus's backup mutant husk is always created from the genetic base of Charles Xavier. I'm assuming it's because Charles offered it up to him in order to create a husk, and that's also probably why he looks the way that he does. Kinda similar looking to Charles, if he was like an energy body.
He just moves between those. These husks do not have any sort of mind or consciousness within them, so there's no ethical dilemmas with him burning these bodies out instead. They are, for lack of a better term, meat bags for him to puppet around. So with the Five having a whole system in place to keep Proteus around that involves cloning extra bodies for him, you'd think he would be very, very important to the process. With that question, what exactly does Proteus do within the Five? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. Don't get me wrong, it is described.
To be fair, Proteus does get another duty within this process later, but the job is very specific to certain cases, and the first comics established that he is involved in every resurrection. We'll go over what that other job is later. Okay, is he just there for those emergency scenarios then?
Within the comic, right in the first sequence that we see a mutant getting revived in, they say exactly what everybody's doing. And for Proteus, he's using his powers on the eggs produced by Egg to reality warp them into, quote, being viable. The problem is that in this case, being viable is never really described in a specific way. He's not turning some other material into an egg. It is explicitly said that these things are eggs at the moment in which they are generated.
My guess then is that he bends a little bit of reality in order to make sure that the egg succeeds in hatching. I'm assuming that there may be a chance of fertilization to fail. I don't even know if I could use that term here, because like, what is going on? But that's my guess currently.
He's also not kickstarting their biological processes. That's going to happen in the next step. So what he's really doing to them is kind of just magic, I guess. But these are superhero comics, so screw it. Magic, yeah. I guess, is an acceptable answer. Fabio generates an egg, and then Proteus hits it with a nice dose of reality warping, getting everything in line within the egg's structure so that it will work for mutant rebirth. That's good enough. It's kind of a cop-out, but Proteus can tie up any loose ends that may be present in this process. Though for what it's worth, reality warping is confirmed to be integral to the resurrection protocols to such a level that they would not work without this step. We know this because of a very quick text box that confirms Moira McTaggart knew reality warping would be necessary and thus engineered circumstances for herself, ensuring that she would give birth to a reality warper. And apparently did the same thing for Charles Xavier too, which is now one of the canon reasons for why Legion exists. So that's weird. Regardless, with
Legion, that's what the TV show is based on, right?
Proteus having done whatever magic is necessary, we return to the foundational step very briefly. This is the point where DNA from the mutants, as archived by Mr. Sinister, is injected into the now viable egg. They take whatever mutant's code they need and then just kind of stick it in there. At this point, we are moving along pretty quickly and already have our mutant egg, a little biological orb hard-coded to the DNA of whatever mutant they're trying to revive. Next up is step 3, Elixir. Elixir, real name Joshua Foley, was raised extremely anti-mutant and was actually part of several active human supremacist groups, until, of course, his own mutant abilities manifested, at which point he was disowned by everybody. Josh was quickly approached by the X-Men and offered a home and education at X-Mansion, but still full of anti-mutant tendencies, he rejected the offer. Then his parents found out that he was a mutant, disowned him completely, and signed over legal guardianship of Josh to the school itself, meaning that he kind of had to go to X-Mansion. There was nowhere else for him. After a rocky start with his other teammates, who understandably were not very happy about a racist joining their ranks, Joshua learned from his past mistakes and ended up becoming a valued member of the New Mutants, especially given that his powers are insanely strong. Elixir has total control over biology itself, which can be used in a variety of different situations. For one, he's an incredible healer, able to heal wounds and cure injuries just by touching somebody.
So the name Elixir, yeah, that makes sense. I thought it's just because it's something that you save up 99 of by endgame and never use.
But on the other hand, the power goes both ways, and he can easily cause any sorts of wounds or give people diseases like that. This power also
damn.
works down to the genetic level, meaning that anybody Elixir touches is completely at his mercy. Thank God he's usually a pretty nice guy, because if he wanted to body horror murder people, he could do so with barely a second thought. Now, he does have some power limitations to balance out how obscenely strong he is. For one, he does require touch or at least close proximity in a lot of cases, and secondly, if he uses his power too much, he can overload himself and go unconscious. Third,
Gotcha.
he does not possess intuitive knowledge of how to do anything with his powers. He can heal basic injuries without too much thought, but if he wants to do something complex, he does need to know how what he's doing works, but he has been given psychic knowledge transfers about human anatomy and biology, so he is genius level at it already. Finally, and most importantly, Elixir's mental health is not very good a lot of the time. The darker side of his powers and some things he's done with them in the past have given him a lot of PTSD, and since he has control over his own biology, when his mental state is doing bad, he will often subconsciously weaken his own body, and since he's in full control, this gets very hard to treat by outside sources. With Elixir's powers described, a lot of you can probably guess what his role in the Resurrection Protocols is.
This is also the reason his appearance changes from arc to arc. His physical form is tied directly to his own perception of himself and his abilities. That is pretty cool reason why his form changes. It's neat they have a lore reason, because I feel like oftentimes I usually just chalk it up to, you know, a different artist trying out a different style for the character. But yeah, I don't know if I would enjoy having a power where my physical appearance depends on how I think of myself. If you're in an incredibly confident mood, then yeah, hell yeah, it'll work out. But that's not always going to be the case. Regardless of who you are, you're going to have your moments of weakness, and in those moments of weakness, you just straight up becoming physically weaker, which is probably not the time that you want to become physically weaker, is not so great.
At step 3, Elixir takes the embryo and kickstarts its biological processes, presumably also making sure that it will develop correctly in the process of that. This, again, calls into question what exactly Proteus is doing during all this, and what
Okay, because that's what I thought Proteus was doing, but no, Elixir is definitely the person who's doing that. I just have to assume, yeah, it's to make sure that the egg itself is viable to be fertilized in the first place.
effect his reality magic is having, but as I said earlier, weird magic is a good enough answer in this case. At this point, we're done with the parts of the Resurrection Protocols that are essentially just cloning. We have a viable mutant egg coated with the correct DNA that is growing and maturing, so given time, it will hatch into a mutant. But if you have to wait for the egg to develop and then subsequent baby to grow and mature, this is not the most efficient form of immortality, and that's where step 4 comes in. This mutant is Eva Bell, codename Tempest, and from everything that I've said over the last minute, you can assume correctly that she has time manipulation powers.
Yep.
She gained her powers in the classic mutant way, that being during her teenage years in a time of intense stress. In Eva's case specifically, this was when her older brother tried to beat up a boy she liked, and their fight got so violent that she froze time all around them. From here, the X-Men found her, helped her out, and she joined the team. You know how this kind of thing goes. After this, her powers have mostly gotten under control, though Tempest has had a couple unintentional time travel incidents, most notably the time she accidentally sent herself into the future and got training from a future version of Magic who was Sorcerer Supreme of the entire galaxy.
I mean, that's pretty freaking cool. Only if it led to a positive outcome and, hopefully not accidentally. I think it was accidentally, but hey, it worked out, I would assume.
So that's cool. Back in the present, Tempest's role within the Five is exactly what you'd expect it to be. She puts a time bubble around the eggs, specifically crafted to age up the body inside without damaging the rest of it, and then lets that run until the body reaches the correct age. That just being however old the original was at the moment of their death, so there's no gaps. So now the body is completely ready to go, but as for the mutants involved, we've only addressed 4 out of the 5. Well, plus Cerebro and the whole backup system, but again, that's more like foundational material used in the process rather than a part of the process itself. The last actual member of the 5 is also the most important, Hope Summers. She actually has 2 roles, though one of them doesn't get revealed until later. We'll just address the first one now. Hope is a very important character to mutant history, both in-universe and in terms of real-world production. She is the first mutant born with an X gene after the whole No More Mutants thing, where Wanda Maximoff removed the majority of mutant genetics from the planet. She was born to a regular human woman, though it would later be revealed that this was because of a weird immaculate conception thing that was done by a time-traveling Jean Grey, but whatever. More importantly, she was—
Yeah, okay. I do know a little bit more about Hope Summers here, thanks to you guys leaving details on that in the comments. So, Cable's daughter, also granddaughter of Cyclops. I had mistakenly thought that she was his daughter when we initially learned about her.
was then taken to the future by Cable, and that's where she was raised. This is also why she has the last name Summers. It's just adopted from Cable.
Yeah.
Seeing as she is living proof of mutant persistence after the whole Scarlet Witch incident, a lot of mutants see Hope as a literal mutant messiah.
I mean, hey, Hope.
And her powers
Fitting
contribute
name.
to this. Hope's mutant power is power over mutation. When there are other mutants in her vicinity, she can amplify or stabilize their powers and even copy them herself, meaning that she can do basically anything as long as the right people are near her. This means that within the Resurrection Protocol,
That makes a lot of sense considering there was the whole conception thing from Jean Grey and with her powers and the Phoenix Force and whatnot. Yeah, I could see that definitely being the case.
protocols as performed by the Five, Hope functions as a sort of anchor. A lot of primal forces are being thrown around when mutants are getting revived. Time, biology, reality, eggs, and Hope's job is to make sure none of that goes wrong. She acts as a telepathic through line, making sure the powers of the others operate in peak performance and in perfect unison. Plus, if something goes wrong during the process and one of the Five becomes incapacitated, Hope can step in with her power mimicry and finish the job. So now you might be wondering why I counted her as step 5 when she's not really a technical step in the process like the others are, but again, she has another role within the sequence that
She's
we will be getting
basically
to later.
a conductor.
At this stage, the
whole
Resurrection
orchestra.
Protocol is almost done, and for the final remaining step, it loops back around to the beginning. A telepath is required for this, usually Charles Xavier, but technically any telepath can fill the role if they are strong enough, and their job is to take the mental backup from Cerebro and port it into the new body. With that, abracadabra, you have a new version of a dead mutant, picking up
Look at Charles here. What is this stance, bro? We've seen this panel before. It still cracks me up.
right where they left off. This system is both effective and efficient, but since it does rely on the presence of 5 very specific people, it has a couple of flaws. Luckily, since Jonathan Hickman is a madman that loves building out every part of the world that he possibly can, we also know some of the safety protocols that are in place to keep the 5 running smoothly. If any of the 5 themselves are killed, they are obviously pushed to the top of the priority resurrection list. How would resurrecting be possible without one of the members, you might ask? Well, 2 other mutants, those being Sync and Mimic, are kept on constant retainer in case of this event. This is
I see. So basically just another body that can copy the same person and then just do their part of the process in order to bring them back. That makes sense. Technically, we never see Mimic actually do this. He was listed as a possible sub in a data file alongside Sync though, and Sync does sub in at one point. Gotcha.
because both Sync and Mimic have the ability to copy other mutant powers, much like Hope, and if they're ever needed, they're just called in to sub for whoever's out. Interestingly, the one mutant that they will not immediately sub in for is Egg, not because he isn't important, but rather because his eggs can be generated in advance and held on standby. This means that if he dies, he just gets revived by one of the eggs that they already had in storage, and a substitute is not needed. This is how granular the world building of Krakoa gets. We have, like, the government protocol backlogs in case of an emergency down to this level of specificity. That makes for a surprisingly good segue into the next section of the video, which is the rules and regulations surrounding the resurrection process, of which there are many. First off, since resurrection is not an immediate process and does require the involvement of a bunch of people, there is a priority list as to who comes back first. This was hinted
Actually, I suppose so. You would need proof of death because if there are 2 of the same people running around, that could create a whole lot of issues.
at just a second ago in the bit about power mimics being on standby, but it's not just for them and members of the 5. Members of the Quiet Council, which is the ruling body of Krakoa,
Priority resurrection is also given to active fighters in an ongoing conflict and anyone who's a casualty of war. Does the amount of text boxes in this video help hammer home how insane the world building is? I suppose so. It's not like I did come into here expecting this though. But it is really nice that we go into this much detail. It just makes it way more interesting.
also have revival priority. On the other side of this, there are also some mutants that are prohibited from being revived through this process, specifically anyone with precognitive or future-telling abilities, which is a little bit odd considering that Krakoa is supposed to be for all mutants regardless of anything.
Well, no, it's for the mutants that we deem can be there. Everybody else, no, you're out of luck, man.
But one specific category of power is banned. The reason for this has nothing to do with capability. It is entirely possible to resurrect precogs. It has everything to do with the back-end politics of Krakoa. This is a whole thing that's very connected to the storyline of Krakoa as a whole, but basically, it was destined to fail in the future, and wanting to prevent this secret from getting out, Professor X said that nobody who could see that future would be allowed on the island. This, of course, contributed to its eventual fall, as Mystique is married to a precognitive, and she very much wanted her wife back, so she did a whole thing, and a lot of other people suffered in the process. But Mystique got her wife back, so good for her. The other category prohibited from the protocols are clones, or anyone who is otherwise a duplicate, perhaps because of time travel or alternate universe nonsense. This was just kind of a safety thing. They didn't want to bring back duplicates of people through a process that was adjacent to already cloning, especially because, as I've mentioned a few times but not explained yet, this is not cloning, it is true immortality. Introducing clones to the process would just mess all that up. This rule would get modified a little bit in the later Krakoa era, allowing resurrection of clones who have proven themselves to be distinct enough from the originals, with the defining factor being whether Cerebro generated a separate backup profile from them. Though, on the topic of clones, what happens if the Five try to resurrect somebody who isn't actually dead? After all, the process does not require the original body to work, since all the backups are pre-saved or downloaded by Cerebro. So, yeah, what's the deal with that? The mutants were very concerned about this as well, and so it became an immediate rule for the Five that proof of death must be provided for a resurrection to begin. In the cases that proof of death could not be found, but the mutant was missing, then a separate process would begin. The missing mutant process begins when Cerebro is unable to pull a backup from them for more than a month, which is a pretty long time for a missing persons case, but the mutants are often time traveling or getting into adventures in other dimensions, lots of times where they might be out of Cerebro's reach, so they need to have a big window there. Once this window passes, the report is moved on to Sage, a mutant who is
Okay, here's the thing though, like if you do create somebody who has been missing for a long time, but then all of a sudden they come back, then what do you do with the person that you've just created? Do you just get rid of them because they're not needed anymore since the original is still alive?
Basically a living computer. She uses her powers to scan for a mutant as well, and if she cannot find them with her resources, then the missing persons report is officially generated. At this point, it is passed on to an entire team dedicated just to this cause, X-Factor Investigations.
I see. When he had introduced X-Factor before, I thought that they were quite interesting, but there was a bit of a wrench thrown into that since everybody was immortal, so investigating murder cases didn't seem all that interesting because of that. But if this is a part of it, I can understand more what they're trying to do with the X-Factor team.
That's right, the Krakoa version of the X-Factor team is a bunch of detectives specializing in missing persons cases related to mutants, just so that they can prove whether those people are dead or not to start the resurrection process if needed, which is such an incredibly cool idea and maybe one of the best evolutions of the mutant immortality concept that the Krakoa era ever gave us. Now, with all the legal and procedural things around resurrection established, let's move on to some limitations of the process and also weird quirks and edge cases it can run into. This is kind of just going to be a catch-all section, I'll be honest.
I mean, considering it's the X-Men, it's really hard to be able to cover every single possibility out there with everybody's powers being so widely different. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
But I wanted to address a few more things before I get to the culture of resurrection and how that affected Krakoa, so I'm going to shove them all here in the middle. First off here, I'm sure some of you are wondering how the resurrection protocol works with features that are non-biological or at least non-genetic. Things like missing limbs, scars, defects, or in some cases, prosthetic and other non-organic additions to the body. In terms of physical disability or disfigurements, the resurrection can handle this either way. Some mutants came back with those things healed if that's what they so chose, but if they wanted to keep those features, it was perfectly possible for one of the five, probably Elixir, to just bake those into the mutant's newly growing biology so that they came out the same as they went in. As
Fair.
for non-biological material, the comics didn't actually address this.
How about we just throw this at Proteus, huh? Proteus is the one doing all this. Fair?
First, they
think
let
we can
that
do
question
that.
sit for a while before finally answering it, even though a lot of the fans were really concerned. Like Wolverine, for example. Wolverine has adamantium bones. If you're going to
how do
bring
you
him back
replace
through
that?
a largely biological process, adamantium is not part of his biology. That was forced into him later. Hilariously, this actually gave Proteus a
there you
reason
go.
to be there. While it was not stated like this in the original description, which is why I said it the way I did when I was going over that, it was later established that Proteus, with his reality warping, is the one in charge of this kind of thing.
I wonder if they just created Proteus for scenarios like this, or he just so happened to be a good reason for it afterwards, and we're like, you know what, we'll just roll with it. Regardless, though, having that catch-all character is probably a good idea, because as we said earlier, there's way too many scenarios.
And sometimes he gets it wrong. When Laura Kinney, technically a clone of Wolverine, but one genetically different enough to be brought back right from the start, died and was revived for the first time, Proteus brought her back with an adamantium skeleton. She didn't have that before. That was only a process that had happened to Wolverine in his adulthood. It was not a genetic feature. But Proteus
Gotcha.
didn't do his research and just kind of thought that since she was Wolverine, she had identical powers. So abracadabra, she has a stronger skeletal system now because Proteus messed up. As hilarious as this is, it does open up an
Whoops.
interesting question, that being, what if a mutant wants to get revived with some sort of additional feature or extra power?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people would if it made them just better in combat, but there may be a whole like request system around that, or just no. If there's a mistake that happens, then it is what it is, but if not, then just stick to your original stuff, because that might mess up everything else. Maybe? We'll see.
And the short version of this is that at a baseline, it's not allowed, and at higher levels of
Yeah,
complexity,
thought so.
it probably just wouldn't work. While small augmentations have been allowed through Resurrection, larger ones have been banned, and it is theorized by Moira McTaggart that if they were to go so far as to put a mutant mind into the husk of a different mutant, it would not work, and the cognitive dissonance would be so much that the whole thing would fail. Speaking of failures,
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's a lot to read. It's also super on brand for Krakoa, and I should have expected it. The resurrection failures I'm about to talk about are general ones. There are a lot of weird edge cases in which a specific mutant's powers, biology, or even willingness to be revived can throw a wrench in the resurrection. Kitty Pryde's phasing, Miss Marvel's inhuman genetics, and Magneto's trauma, to name a few. I'm not going to go over each individual edge case though, going to stick to quirks inherent to the process of revival, not the actual people being revived. Roger that.
there are a couple cases in which the resurrection protocols simply do not work, or at least don't work as intended, most typically resulting when the mutant in question dies in another dimension. During the X of Swords event, the mutant Rockslide died in Otherworld, an alternate dimension full of magic and strange fey weirdness. I talk about this a lot in another video I did actually, one on Captain Britain, so if you want to learn more about Otherworld, go check out this one. But the thing you need to know for this topic today is that Otherworld is called a nexus of all realities. Essentially, it is a singular point within the multiverse. There is only one Otherworld, and anyone going to Otherworld from anywhere in the multiverse will end up at the same one. Because Rockslide died there, his consciousness kind of got mixed up when it came to the resurrection protocols, and the version that came out of the egg wasn't him, at least not in the same way. His personality was distinctly different, and it was later figured out that because he died in Otherworld, when he was resurrected, the consciousness that came back was not the original Rockslides, but rather a weird amalgamation of Rockslides from throughout the multiverse, creating not really a gestalt being, it was a singular consciousness, but one with aspects of a lot of different versions of Rockslide, which made him a different being, basically. This new one was codenamed Wrongslide and stuck around for
What? They codenamed him Wrong Slide? You're fucking kidding me, bro. Imagine being him. I didn't ask for this. You guys resurrected me, and now I'm here and I exist, and I don't really know who I am. But I do appreciate concepts like this. I find them quite fascinating, between the whole clone, gestalt, new consciousness, all these things. Well, somebody is a fan of Nier. I think it's pretty clear to see that, yeah, I'd be into that kind of stuff. I'm really hoping that Arknight's Enfield has this concept of reconveners, which is quite similar to this, actually. That they're going to do something intriguing with that in whatever upcoming updates they have. It's just such a fun, mindfucky concept to think about.
For a while, because he was an independent sentient entity. They couldn't just get rid of him, not ethically at least.
Yeah.
But because this process of creating new amalgamated life was very weird, it was very, very quickly banned. Rockslide himself, the original I mean, was later resurrected, though it was never fully explained how. If I had to guess,
in all likelihood, the original Rockslide survival was probably a continuity error, seeing as it was never explained. And the original Rockslide's permadeath was a big plot point when it happened. Yeah, with how many things happened within Marvel Comics, I'm not surprised. There's probably a couple more examples of continuity errors like this. Some probably pretty big ones too.
yes, I bet they just did it from like an old Cerebro backup that they somehow had. The other bit of dimensional interference that we know can interfere with the resurrections happens if mutants die in the alternate world known as Amenth. Now, Amenth is a whole other thing. I definitely have a video planned on that subject and some related ones, but for purposes of resurrection, if a mutant dies and is resurrected in Amenth, they actually come back better, at least in some ways. Somehow
Weird.
mutants revived in this specific way come back with slight power enhancements, though their personalities are also altered a little bit. Once again, it is not really explained how exactly this happens, though it is described quickly as being kind of like computer defragmentation of files. Somehow dying in Amenth and having your consciousness uploaded to Cerebro through that medium, like, streamlines it and makes it better? Don't really know exactly how that works, but Mr. Sinister has weaponized it a couple of times. Now that we've established
Oh, of course. I mean, if dying there makes you better and you know for a fact that you're gonna get resurrected anyways, then wouldn't you want to do that in order to become stronger? Such a strange concept, a neat little detail, though, that can be exploited by, well, people like Dr. Sinister over here, or Mr. Sinister, I guess.
exactly how the immortality process works, let's talk about how that affected the mutants in question. Since they could now not die, or more specifically, they could die however, and then it just wouldn't really matter in the long term. Unsurprisingly, that did some things to their culture.
Yeah,
The darkest
definitely.
but also most interesting example of this comes in the form of a ritual known as the Crucible. This actually goes all the way back to Scarlet Witch saying no more mutants. When she did this, she did not kill all the mutants, she merely removed all of their mutant abilities. This did kill some of them by proxy, but a lot of them just had to live as normal people, and many of them were not happy with this. Even in the Krakoa era and the years after, the mutants who kept their abilities and the ones who gained abilities after did not immediately forsake everyone who was depowered. That's kind of implied at in some of the movies, that mutants will just abandon people if they're not mutants anymore. The comics didn't really take that angle, and former mutants were allowed on Krakoan soil. This was fine and relatively normal for a time,
cool.
but
Yeah.
it was quickly realized that because of the way that Cerebro and the DNA and the resurrection protocol
So, in order to regain your mutant powers, you just have to die. Yeah, I see where this is going.
worked, if a depowered mutant died, they could be revived with their powers again. Here's where it's going to get dark. There quickly became concerns that some depowered mutants would willingly kill themselves in order to gain access to the revival, which would bring them back with their former state restored. And I have to be honest, this is a fascinating ethical dilemma. I said right in the intro of the video that Krakoa was full of ethical debates, and this might be my favorite of them. Obviously, the rulers of Krakoa did not want to encourage suicide. There was no way that was going to turn out good. But on the other hand, in this very specific case, it would not be lasting, and if by killing themselves, someone could restore themselves to a state that was taken from them, isn't that something that they should be allowed to do? The solution that they came up with was known as the Crucible, a form of ritual combat overseen by Apocalypse. Yes, Apocalypse was on Krakoa, one of the rulers no less. Remember, this was for all mutants, not just the heroic ones. In the Crucible, mutants who wanted to regain their
So you
former
would
powered
die in
status
battle.
would fight Apocalypse himself to the death. Now, of course, these people were not going to defeat Apocalypse. They didn't have any super
I mean, especially without any mutant powers, yeah, that's... I guess, you know, it's not by your own hands, so at the very least, but man, It really does come with some pretty interesting questions of should this even be allowed. But yeah, in a culture where death doesn't matter, this is definitely going to end up being the case.
Powers at this time, but if they proved themselves and fought valiantly enough, then they would be revived with their mutation restored to them. Apocalypse would eventually leave Krakoa entirely, but the tradition of the Crucible would continue after him. In this new version, people could choose their own combatants in the battle if they so accepted, meaning we get terrifying scenes like this one where somebody tries to fight Magneto. Keep in mind, this isn't really a fight. It is fully understood that when a depowered mutant enters the Crucible, they're going to die.
They're gonna die.
So we get Magneto just absolutely wrecking somebody while also giving a monologue about how much he respects them. Because this is Magneto and somebody fighting to restore their mutant power. There is basically nothing better they can do in Magneto's eyes than to sacrifice themselves for their mutant identity. So he loves this. And my God, just all these scenes are so interesting.
Goddamn.
It should also be noted that the Crucible did not last throughout the entirety of Krakoa. It was abolished later when Scarlet Witch did a whole complicated magical thing and established a pocket dimension called the Waiting Room, which was basically like a sort of limbo purgatory for mutants.
I see. Technically, I don't think the Waiting Room removed the culture of the Crucible entirely, as some mutants still wanted to prove their worthiness in battle. This was just something Scarlet Witch did to atone for her past sins, because the Crucible came into existence directly because of her, and she felt a lot of guilt about that. Understandable. It's kind of funny, though, that we're calling it the Waiting Room. It's almost like you're just sitting in a respawn, just waiting for the cooldown so that you can go back into the game. Just sit here for a second and spectate everybody else doing their thing. In some weird way, though, while I know that there's a lot of ethical questions surrounding it, I actually kind of enjoy the idea of the Crucible. As long as, you know, everybody agrees to it and they know what they're getting themselves into. It kind of reminds me of, like, Vikings fighting in order to die in battle so that they can go to Valhalla. There's just something, it's fucked up to say, but kind of romantic about, you know, proving yourself in battle in order to earn your keep among your people. When you take a step back, you know, it's maybe not the greatest thing ever out there, but I can see why some people would want that. And honestly, if I think, like, I'm thinking myself in that situation, I'd probably do it, even though I'd have to suffer through a horrible death, if I really wanted my X-Men powers back.
Souls awaiting resurrection. Once the Waiting Room existed, depowered mutants could just step through a portal and get placed there immediately, going on to the resurrection list without having to die in ritual combat. So that was a lot nicer, I guess, but it was a little bit less cool. Now, I'll say again, after talking about the Crucible, just to make this very clear, this was treated within the comic as an ethical debate. There's a whole mini-series called Way of X, which revolves around that question through the eyes of Nightcrawler. Whether you personally think this was a good or bad thing, I will leave that up to you to decide, but regardless, it is a cool consequence of immortality in this world building. And speaking of the world building, how did this affect the world beyond mutant kind? The resurrection protocols were kept very, very secret at first. It was not public knowledge that all of the mutants were immortal, but with them dying, sometimes in very public ways, it had to get out eventually. And then the question had to be answered, why weren't they doing this for humans? Interestingly, there's nothing actually stopping the resurrection protocols from functioning for normal humans. The only thing stopping that is the contents of the data backups, both in Cerebro and Mr. Sinister's DNA storage. Both of those could be expanded to include humanity, they just hadn't been because this was something specific to Krakoa and its population. The secrecy was upheld for a while until the Judgment Day event, which is a rabbit hole, a fascinating one, but one that is outside the scope of this video. The important part of Judgment Day for the resurrection protocols was that things on Earth got so bad for a time that the mutants decided they needed to use the resurrection protocols on a human for the first time. Thus, the first human ever brought back with the Krakoan resurrection protocols was Captain America.
Oh, of course it's Cap. They always bring back Cap in one form or another. So, well, like I said at the very beginning of the video, I feel like coming back as a superhero is kind of or should be expected, considering how many times superheroes do come back, not even through this whole process of immortality. But I can understand it being an interesting question to ask, Like, if you can do it for everybody, then why shouldn't you do it for everyone? Why shouldn't we give immortality to everybody so that everybody gets to live out life in peace? Well, I say in peace, but we all know that's not what's going to happen.
Chosen both because he was someone that the mutants trusted implicitly not to be biased against them, and since he was a human who was very good at being a capable leader, and thus could bridge the gap between mutants and humanity, which was an extremely strained gap at the time. After resurrection became a known factor to the rest of the world, the mutants still did not open it up to everybody, but at the encouragement of Jean Grey, did establish something called the Phoenix Foundation, a program which would take 5% of the Five's resources and use it to resurrect humanity, prioritizing the vulnerable, the weak, and the poor. This outreach program was made with genuine help in mind, of course. That was Jean's goal for it.
I get that, and it's an honorable thing to do. But then the question is, why do you get to decide who gets to come back?
Of course, it did also help ease some diplomatic tensions that Krakoa was facing at the time, so it had a double purpose. This foundation didn't last for too long, though, as we are now reaching the final days of Krakoa, and therefore the final days of Mutant Immortality. One of the turning points in this was the death of Hope Summers. Not a permanent death, of course. Everyone can be revived, and as we established a while ago, there were retainers on standby. Sync stood in for her and helped coordinate everybody's powers, allowing her to be brought back. But this caused issues. See, it turns out that Mr. Sinister, known insane supervillain, had been using the resurrection protocols to his own ends this entire time, or at least he had been attempting to, though it hadn't actually worked. All of the DNA backups he had been providing were infected with his own DNA and special markers that would in theory allow him to control his modified clones. But somehow, none of that DNA had been getting through, and the reason it wasn't making its way through was Hope Summers. With Hope dead, the Mr. Sinister plot that had been stewing for years finally was able to activate, turning a bunch of people into Sinister-controlled clones and leading to an entire event called Sins of Sinister.
Gotcha, but does that mean Hope knew exactly what she was doing, or was it just a natural thing that happened during the process, and so the whatever he planted in there just wasn't activating, not working?
He takes over the entire world, and this spirals into utter chaos because he loses control of everything immediately. Then people kind of time travel back from the future and prevent it. This is a whole complicated thing, and in the main timeline, it does get averted when people figure out what's happening because of the time travel. But yeah, point is, Mr. Sinister was trying to control everybody the whole time, and Hope somehow was preventing it. This is going to get really cosmically weird for a second because, well, the ending of Krakoa was, I don't want to say that it's bad, but a lot of things happened in the Krakoa era, and you could kind of tell that by the end, the writers were getting worried that it was going to collapse under its own weight, so they decided to end it before it got to that point, meaning that it did end before it became an unmitigated disaster, but it was a little bit rushed and therefore confusing. First off...
Yeah, okay, I see. I understand. I think oftentimes when, especially on projects that there are multiple different writers working on it, and when you're working with something this complex and you're trying to simulate reality, essentially, there can end up being way too many scenarios that can happen here, and trying to tie up every single loose end in one go is going to be a monumental task that I don't know anybody out there is really prepared for, which is why, like I said, I have a very deep respect for people who can do that, because that seems like an insane amount of work.
Hope Summers is the daughter of the Phoenix Force, not Jean Grey, or at least not just Jean Grey. Remember how a while ago I said there was a whole immaculate conception thing going on? Yeah, the Phoenix Force was directly involved in the conception and birth of Hope Summers. This means that not only is she a perfect theoretical host for the Force, she is also connected to it in like a weird, trippy, cosmic way. The Phoenix Force exists in an extra-universal and even extra-multiversal cosmic plane called the White Hot Room. This is the origin point of the Phoenix Force, and therefore it is the origin point of life energy throughout all existence. The Phoenix is the cosmic force of life, and therefore all life technically stems from here in a weird metaphysical way. Because of this weird cosmic connection,
there's a weird point of note in this arc where the Phoenix is tied even more heavily to mutant kind than usual. The Phoenix, to be clear, is not really a mutant-specific force. It embodies all life. The ending of Krakoa did write it as more of a mutant thing though, for reasons unclear. I wish I had a better answer as to why, but I do not. Well, during the whole, Enigma video, wasn't, the body that Jean Grey was using in order to fight Enigma also basically formed up by all the different mutants as well? So that was probably a part of that. But yeah, my understanding of the Phoenix Force has always been that it's been a life force, just generally speaking. But obviously Jean Grey is considered a mutant, so I guess they tied it in that way. Really, it's comic books. They do what they need to do in order to write whatever story they need to write.
Hope's second purpose within the Five was acting as a conduit to the White Hot Room. Now, this was revealed years after the Five were established, so it doesn't seem like this was intentionally her second purpose there, but regardless, she was why it was functioning as true immortality. The bodies that were generated by the resurrection protocols were technically clones, sure, but because of the Phoenix Force's interference, the souls of the resurrected were being held in a sort of stasis in the White Hot Room, and when someone was brought back through this very specific process, Hope Summers would subconsciously channel their original soul into the new body. Now, if you want to be really technical about it, you could consider this still not true immortality because there is death involved. If you want to do the most specific terminology you can, I guess it's closest to reincarnation, but reincarnation into the exact state you were in when you died. It's a weird enough thing, and I don't know if there's a great comparison for it in other media, so screw it, I'm just going to call it immortality. I think it's justified enough that it's close. So this was the final ingredient that made everything function, a little shot of life force magic right at the end, and with that I can recap the whole process. Step 0. The Five draw mental and physical data backups from the archives established by Professor X and Mr. Sinister respectively. Step 1. Egg makes an egg. It is as simple as that. This is not a complicated one. Step 2. Proteus does a little bit of reality warping on the egg, first off somehow making it viable, but more specifically providing for any non-organic modifications that the mutant needs. Step 3. Elixir handles the organic specifics, also kickstarting the growth and development of the newly designed embryo. Step 4. Tempest puts the egg in a time bubble in which the embryo's development is sped up to the necessary age. And Step 5, the mutant is implanted with the psychic backup by a telepath, and during this entire process, their consciousness is synced to their actual soul in the White Hot Room through the involvement of Hope Summers. And this process happened all the time, every day, so often that there were procedures and bureaucracy put in place to ensure it operated smoothly. Resurrection was a common part of Krakoan life, until of course, Krakoa wasn't around anymore. Weirdly, the ending of Krakoa is actually directly connected to the resurrection protocols, and while this is a whole thing deserving of its own video, I will summarize it quickly as it relates to today's topic. Towards the end of the era, the extremely underrated villain Mother Righteous wounds the Phoenix Force. Notably, not Jean Grey, she is able to wound the cosmic Phoenix Force itself, which causes a lot of problems. The mutants very much need the Phoenix Force at the time to fight
I'm so glad that I went back to watch the Enigma video first before this one.
Off a villain called Enigma, who they are currently facing. I did an entire video on what his whole thing is if you're curious, but with the Phoenix Force wounded, it has retreated into the far reaches of metaphysical space, and they can't access it. In an attempt to bring the Phoenix back into the fight, Hope goes after it, and is successful in hunting the thing down, but she's not going to heal it, she's going to kill it. Amazingly, she is successful in this, killing the Phoenix in the White Hot Room and sacrificing herself in the process. But as you'd expect from something literally...
If you're wondering how she killed the Phoenix Force of all things with a gun, it wasn't a normal gun. It was powered by Legion, who can manifest new powers, getting amped up by Hope's own mutant boosting abilities. Basically, they created a superpower feedback loop and shot the Phoenix with that. Okay, gotcha. That makes a little more sense. Imagine you could just kill the Phoenix Force with a gun.
called the Phoenix, this does not finish it off, and rather forces the Phoenix to rebirth itself, which was the goal all along.
But it's a Phoenix,
is restored and brought back to full strength. This is also, canonically, the origin of the Phoenix Force as well. It is a cosmic being, and the White Hot Room exists outside of linear time.
Oh yeah, it's like the same thing that happened to Enigma, right? If one of the, I think they're called Dominions, exists, then that means that they have always existed. and always will exist.
So this reincarnation of the Phoenix Force is not technically a second Phoenix, it is the first one, and it will then go through time until it reaches this point and is reborn, and the cycle continues. Thus, Hope fulfills her destiny as the mutant messiah, as the child of a cosmic god sacrifices herself to save her people. Back at its full strength, or I guess at its full strength for the first time, depending on how you want to look at the timeline, the Phoenix Force resurrects all mutants, like all of them at once, and channeling itself through Jean Grey, there's a big cool cosmic fight scene with Enigma, which again, you can hear more about in that other video. After this point, Krakoa is gone and the mutants are scattered to the winds once more, the resurrection protocols going with them. However, they do persist in a newer and, dare I say, weirder form. In the aftermath of Krakoa, the island itself ascends to the white-hot room, and that is now where it exists, outside of the multiverse, as basically a mutant-exclusive heaven? Mutant souls still go there upon their death, they just don't go back because the resurrection protocols are no longer running. Hope is in the White Hot Room too, so there's no conduit to bring the souls back as there originally was. But the White Hot Room is a paradise, and so this is a strange but ultimately good outcome, I guess. After that, the era of mutant immortality, or
you know, with the world being as fucked up as it is, if I die and instead of getting resurrected, I get to go live a very happy life in paradise, I think I'll take that. You know, I had a good run. I did my best. It's time for me to chill, kick back, and let everybody else suffer.
Or at least mutant immortality in the physical plane comes to a close with a big bird-shaped bang. Even though Krakoa itself was incredibly complicated, I think the immortality stuff was one of the most intriguing parts about it. Remember, everything that I've said in this video is just a summary and snapshot of all the effects and implications that immortality had. The Krakoa era lasted for 5 years of real-time publication, so there's a lot more that I didn't touch on, but this should get you the basics. The way that these writers were able to explore immortality from so many angles, from the technical to the political to even the religious, worked incredibly well, and I don't know if we're going to see something of that scale happen in Marvel again, at least not for a long time. Looping back to the intro of the video, the Krakoa era often gets written off by fans, but for very different reasons. Some people love it and think everything that the mutants did was completely blameless and that all their actions were justified given their history.
What?
Meanwhile, on the other hand, I've seen a lot of people that hate Krakoa and think the mutants were basically villains for the entire run of it.
I don't fall into that place either. But I guess the toughest place to sit is always on the fence, because then everybody hates you for it. I guess I'm not as invested within the characters themselves, so I just see this as a very interesting plot line that they're being brought down, and that there are some really cool moments that have happened. Of course, regardless of whatever type of arc it is, there's always going to be its shortcomings, which we've seen in the video with the Quiet Council. But I guess experiencing that piece of art itself, despite it being flawed, doesn't necessarily diminish that experience. I'm glad that I learned about it, and I think it was a cool idea that took a lot of people a lot of effort to kind of bring together, even if it didn't end in the best way possible, or had like the best journey along the way.
The answer, of course, lies somewhere in the middle. Krakoa got philosophical and did not lose those philosophical elements when comic book nonsense was happening, at least not usually. Krakoa tackled the ethics of immortality in one of the most interesting ways I've ever seen, and I'm not going to answer any of those ethical questions for you. If you're intrigued enough to think about them more, I encourage you to go and read these comics for yourself to make your own opinions. Look, YouTube lore breakdowns are great, and personally, I think I'm pretty good at making them, but trust me, they do not compare to reading the stories for yourself.
Oh yeah, 100%. Oh, as somebody whose basically entire YouTube career has been doing that, there are sometimes going to be certain aspects that a reviewer just can't really get to, and they'll never be able to fully convey within their review until you play the game or read the story itself. Of course, these are great though, because it allows people who maybe don't have as much time anymore to really invest into doing all of those things to still get a portion of what that thing is and learn about it and, you know, find out how cool it is. Maybe in the future when they do have the time that they can go and check it out for themselves. I do think though that the most important thing to keep in mind is, regardless of whatever media that you're looking at, especially if you're watching like a YouTuber talk about something, always remember to form your own opinions about that. I feel like more often than not, so many people will go out there and find their new opinion of the day based on whatever YouTuber that they're watching or what their favorite YouTuber says to them. Like, we're all just human. There's gonna be some times that we make mistakes too, so just keep that in mind, my dudes.
If death is an interesting narrative topic, then the total absence of death is equally as interesting, and Krakoa proves just how much change can be caused by only 5 people.
I mean, it's really funny that that's how stories go, where you talk about death even more in-depthly when there is a lack of it. And there are so many stories about humanity that don't even have to do with humanity. And like, it's told through robots, right? Just that exploration of something new that feels kind of familiar, but we're exploring it from a different angle can really be refreshing, and I think is a good playground, as it were, for telling amazing stories. Or, well, not really playground. I think the better word here is sandbox.
Even if one of them just makes eggs. Thank you all so much for watching. I know this has been a highly requested video, so I'm happy to have finally made it. In the conclusion here, let me address again how I'm going to be handling Krakoa stuff, because I know a lot of people have been asking. So Krakoa as a whole topic is massive, as these few videos I've done on the subject should probably already prove. A lot of people have been calling for a feature-length video on Krakoa, and guys, I would like to do that, but it would be too long. Like, one singular Krakoa video would be at minimum 4 to 5 hours, and that would be skipping a whole lot of stuff. While I'm sure a lot of you would watch that, it's not the most practical thing for me to make by myself. So what I've chosen to do instead is cover differing Krakoa topics in their own dedicated videos, and as of today, I've also put those in a playlist, so you can see the ones I've covered already, and more of them will be added over the coming months. On that note, let me know in the comments what other aspects of Krakoa you would like to see me cover in their own video. I have a few lined up already, but I'm curious which ones you guys would want me to prioritize. On to normal stuff. For anyone who does not know, I have a Patreon. Over there you can find early and ad-free access to all of my videos and an exclusive video every month. There's already like 2.5 hours of exclusive content on there and counting. My username over there is exact same as it is here. There's also a link on my YouTube channel page and the description of this video. It's very easy to find, and an extra big shout out to everybody who already supports me over there. It really helps me keep making these things for you guys. Final shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with for these videos. He drew the poses of the character you've been watching talk at you for the last 45 minutes. Go check out his stuff if you have a chance. And with that, I'm done with this video. And I'm going to immediately launch into making another one because the new Marvel Rivals season is dropping, and I know a ton of people are going to be asking me about Angela. So I'll just go ahead and tease that video now. Look for that one coming soon. At some point.
Maybe before the Infinity Stones. But alrighty, dudes. I believe it's time for me to sign off, so thank you guys so much for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed your time here, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later, dudes.